They told me I'd never make a good pharmacist because my brain works differently. 3 years later, they were wrong. And I've got the court ruling to prove it. My name is Rebecca Thompson, but my friends call me Becca. I'm 24 years old and a newly qualified pharmacist from University College London. I know that might not sound extraordinary to you, but to me, it represents a victory that almost never happened. A victory that changed not only my life, but potentially the lives of hundreds of other autistic students who will come after me. Today, when I wake up in my little apartment in Camden and glance at my diploma hanging on the wall, right next to the official letter from the Office of the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education, I still remember that morning in March 2022. That was the day an email nearly destroyed all my dreams. The subject line was simple: fitness to practice hearing. Final decision. The content was devastating. My university had decided I was not fit to become a pharmacist. Not because of bad grades. I'd always been an outstanding student. Not because I didn't know the material. I knew every drug, every interaction, every protocol by heart. They expelled me because I'm autistic, and in their eyes, that made me unfit to care for people. That morning, sitting on the cold floor of my room, reading and rereading that email, I had two choices: accept the verdict and give up on the dream that had fueled me since I was 16, or take on one of the most prestigious universities in the world. I chose to fight. And this is the story of how one autistic girl from Manchester stood up to the British education system and won. But before I tell you how it all ended, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because this isn't just about what happened, it's about why it matters. Why this is not just my story, but the story of anyone who has ever been underestimated, silenced, or labeled unfit simply for being who they are. If this story resonates with you, if you or someone you know has ever been through something similar, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Let's shine a light on the stories that need to be told. Hit like if you believe everyone deserves a fair shot at education. Now, come with me on this journey that began 3 years ago. In September 2021, when I first set foot on the UCL campus as a hopeful 21-year-old, completely unprepared for what was coming my way. September 2021. I remember that first day vividly, not just because it was important, but because my autistic brain records every detail when I'm anxious. The smell of rain on London asphalt, the roar of the red buses rolling down Gower Street, the weight of my backpack stuffed with brand new notebooks I had carefully color-coded: blue for pharmacology, green for chemistry, red for molecular biology. I was standing in front of the majestic UCL School of Pharmacy building. A Victorian structure breathing history and knowledge. 180 years of pharmaceutical tradition. Since 1842, some of the brightest minds in pharmacy had walked those halls. And now, somehow, I was one of them. "You made it, Becca," I whispered to myself, echoing the words my mom had told me on the phone the night before. "You actually made it." When I got the acceptance letter 7 months earlier, I cried for 15 minutes straight. Not from sadness, but pure relief and joy. UCL, the third best pharmacy school in the world. They had chosen me. The M-Pharm program was infamous for being brutal. 4 intense years, with a 20% dropout rate in just the first year. But I was ready. I'd scored straight A's in chemistry, biology, and math at Evallo. I'd volunteered at the local Boots pharmacy in my hometown throughout my final school year. I knew every common medication by heart. I wanted to help people, to be the bridge between complex science and human care. What I didn't know on that golden September morning was that I was autistic. The first lecture was basic pharmacology, in the main theater. 250 students, all looking confident, chatting like they'd known each other for years. I picked a seat in the third row, not too eager, not too detached. The professor, Dr. Henderson, was in his 50s, his voice carrying perfectly across the room. "Welcome to pharmacy," he said, sending chills down my spine. "The next 4 years will define not just your careers, but your lives. You're about to learn not just about drugs and dosages, but about responsibility, about the power to heal, and the weight of mistakes." As he spoke about acetaminophen and its hepatotoxicity, I wrote down every word, sketched diagrams in the margins, and color-coded information. It was my system, developed over the years without knowing why, but it worked. At lunch, I tried joining a group in the cafeteria. "Hi," I said to a blonde girl who had sat near me in class. "I'm Becca. Did you find the lecture interesting?" She gave me a strange look, as if I'd said the wrong thing. Yeah. I'm Sophie. It was good." The conversation died right there. I didn't know why. That would happen often in the first months. I'd try to connect, but my social rhythm felt off, like I was dancing to music no one else could hear. It didn't bother me much. I'd always been more of a loner anyway. I had my books, my studies, my systems. Academically, the first weeks were a dream. Pharmacology, medicinal chemistry, physiology, statistics, all of it fit perfectly in my mind. I loved the precision, the clear rules, the way every drug had its mechanism of action, contraindications, and cataloged side effects. My grades were stellar. In the first assessment, I scored 94% in pharmacology and 91% in medicinal chemistry. Top 5% of the class. Professors greeted me in the halls. I was living my dream. But there were signs something wasn't right. Though I couldn't read them yet. The crushing fatigue at the end of each day, as if I'd run a marathon. The need to spend hours alone in my room, in total silence, just to process everything. The way certain sounds, the ventilation in the lab, overlapping conversations in the library, made me physically uncomfortable. And then there was Dr. Marilyn Foster, my clinical supervisor, who seemed to study me with an unsettling gaze. "Rebecca," she told me after one of our first labs, "your technical knowledge is excellent, but you need to work on your interpersonal skills. Pharmacy isn't just about medicine, it's about people." I didn't get it. I'd answered everything right, followed every protocol. In October, we had our first patient simulation. Trained actors came in to role-play pharmacy scenarios. I was nervous, but prepared, with every protocol memorized. My patient was a man in his 60s with hypertension. I asked all the right questions about allergies, medications, recent symptoms. I dispensed the drug with precise dosage and instructions. Afterwards, Dr. Foster pulled me aside. "Rebecca, your technical delivery was flawless, but your interaction felt robotic. You didn't connect. You didn't show empathy." Pharmacy is a caring profession. I was confused. I had followed the script exactly. How was that not caring? "Technically, yes," she said. "But you missed the person behind the patient." That phrase echoed in my mind for weeks. The person behind the patient. What did that mean? I genuinely wanted to help people. Every drug I dispensed was meant to heal, relieve pain, save lives. How was that not care? By November, London's grey skies matched my growing unease. My grades stayed excellent, but feedback formed a worrying pattern. Brilliant academically, but needs emotional intelligence. Outstanding knowledge, weak social skills. too literal, struggles to read between the lines. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I studied harder than anyone, scored higher than most. Yet I felt I was failing at something invisible. And then, in December, during a counseling simulation, things fell apart. My partner, Jessica, role-played a worried mother. "I'm concerned about my daughter," she said. "She's on antidepressants, but I read online they can make teens suicidal. Should I stop giving them to her?" I knew the answer. SSRIs could increase suicidal ideation in under 25s during the first weeks, but sudden withdrawal was also dangerous. I gave a detailed, precise explanation. Mechanisms, timelines, protocols. Jessica looked at me strangely. The room went silent. Dr. Foster approached, expression heavy. "Rebecca, that was very technical. How do you think a scared mother would feel hearing that answer?" "But it was correct," I said. "It's exactly what she needs to make the right decision." Dr. Foster sighed. "Correct information, wrong delivery. Sometimes, information without empathy can do more harm than good." That night, sitting alone in my room, I replayed it over and over. I had given the right answer. I had kept the patient safe. Why wasn't that enough? What was I missing? By January, after my review meeting, Dr. Foster was blunt. "Rebecca, your academic ability is exceptional, but pharmacy is interpersonal. If you can't develop those skills, we'll have to question your fitness to practice." Fitness to practice. Those words haunted me. For the first time since arriving at UCL, I felt real fear that my dream was slipping away. Not because I wasn't capable, but because of something I didn't understand and couldn't fix. That night, I called my mom. "Mom," I whispered, fighting back tears. "I think I'm doing something wrong, but I don't know what." She was quiet for a moment. "Becca, sweetheart, you've always been a little different, more direct, more logical. We thought it was just your personality." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud, that I was different. The first clue to a discovery that would change everything about how I understood myself. February 2022. The second semester brought a bone-chilling cold that seemed to cut right through me. But it was nothing compared to the coldness I started to feel in the university hallways. There was a tension in the air every time I interacted with Dr. Foster and a few other professors. Like they were constantly scrutinizing me, searching for flaws I couldn't see. That's when I met Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a new professor of pharmaceutical psychology who had just joined UCL. She was different from the others, more straightforward, more precise with her questions, and there was something in the way she looked at me that didn't feel judgmental. It felt like recognition. "Rebecca," she said after a particularly tough class on patient communication, "can I have a word with you in private?" My stomach tightened. Another lecture about my interpersonal deficiencies. I followed her into her office, which smelled faintly of coffee, and was organized in a way I instantly admired. Every book in its place. Every paper neatly filed. "Do you feel drained after social interactions?" she asked bluntly. The directness caught me off guard. "Yes," I admitted slowly. "I always thought that was normal." She nodded, like that answer confirmed something. "And do you ever feel like you're acting when you talk to people? Like you're following a script everyone else already knows, but you had to memorize?" My world stopped. That was exactly it. My whole life, I'd been observing people, copying their expressions, memorizing phrases for different situations. I thought everyone did that. "How do you know that?" I whispered. She leaned forward. "Rebecca, have you ever considered that you might be autistic?" The word hit like a lightning bolt. Autism. In my head, still full of stereotypes, autism meant children who didn't talk. who rocked back and forth, who couldn't function. But I talk fine, I said, confused. I get good grades. I live on my own. She gave me a kind smile. That's a really common misconception, especially about autistic women. Autism is a spectrum, and it's much broader than most people think. She handed me a few books and articles. That night, I devoured everything until 4 a.m. Every page felt like holding up a mirror, masking the exhausting process of hiding autistic traits to fit in socially. Sensory overload. Why? I needed complete silence after intense days. Different social processing. Why? I could learn rules logically, but never intuitively. For the first time in my life, I had an explanation for why I was different. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't broken, I just worked differently. But the timing couldn't have been worse. March rolled in with our first real placements in community pharmacies. Our chance to work with real patients instead of actors. I was assigned to a Boots in Bloomsbury, under Mrs. Williams, a no-nonsense head pharmacist in her 50s. The first day was a silent disaster. I knew exactly what to do, technically checking prescriptions, spotting drug interactions, calculating dosages. But every patient interaction felt like a minefield. An older man came in for arthritis meds and started telling me how the pain was ruining his sleep. I immediately jumped into suggesting dosage adjustments and pharmaceutical alternatives. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted empathy, conversation, someone to listen. "You're too young to understand," he said, not harshly, but with a kind of quiet disappointment that stung. Mrs. Williams pulled me aside afterward. "Rebecca, your technical knowledge is flawless, but sometimes people come to a pharmacy for more than medicine. They come for care." That word again, care. I was starting to hate it. What no one saw was the monumental effort behind every single interaction. I had built what I now knew was Maschine toolkit of copied expressions, tone shifts, and gestures. Smiling at the right moment, tilting my head to show I was listening, throwing in small Emmy hums of understanding. It was like acting in a play without ever seeing the full script. By the end of each shift, I was drained. Not physically, but mentally, like I'd just run a marathon inside my head. My roommate Emma started noticing. "You're so quiet when you get home," she said one night. "Sometimes you just stare at the ceiling without blinking. Are you okay?" How could I explain that my brain was replaying 12 hours of forced social performance, cataloging every mistake, planning strategies for tomorrow? Instead, I just said I was tired. April brought my first real warning sign. Dr. Foster called me into a formal meeting with Mrs. Williams and Dr. Peterson, the placement coordinator. The setup felt intimidating, 3 of them on one side of the table, me on the other. "Rebecca," Dr. Foster began, "we've received some concerns about your performance during placement." Mrs. Williams opened a notebook filled with observations. "Your technical skills are excellent," she said. "But there are major issues with patient interactions. Several patients described you as cold and robotic. One even said it felt like you were reading from a manual. Each word was a knife. I was trying so hard, copying behaviors, forcing myself to perform exactly as instructed. I can improve," I said, my voice trembling. "Just tell me what to do differently." Dr. Peterson leaned forward. "Rebecca, this isn't something you can learn from a textbook. It's about emotional intuition, genuine connection. Some people just have it, and others don't." The implication was clear. I didn't. "But I care about the patients," I said desperately. "That's why I'm here." Dr. Foster sighed. "We know your intentions are good, but intentions aren't enough in healthcare. We need to question whether you have the interpersonal skills this profession demands. They handed me what they called an improvement plan. More communication workshops, extra simulated patient sessions, closer supervision on future placements. It was obviously an ultimatum, though they didn't use the word. That night, I called my mom in tears. "They think I'm not cut out to be a pharmacist," I sobbed. "But Mom, this is all I've ever wanted. It's the one thing I'm good at." She paused for a long moment. "Becca, you've always been special. Since you were little, you've seen the world differently. Maybe it's time to find out why." She was the one who pushed me to get an autism evaluation. By May, after weeks of waiting, I finally sat down with Dr. Emma Hughes, a psychologist specializing in adult autism diagnosis. She was warm, calm, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was being judged. The evaluation took 3 hours. Questions about my childhood, my social struggles, my intense interests, sensory processing tests, behavioral assessments. When it was over, she looked at me with a kind of deep understanding. "Rebecca," she said gently, "you're on the autism spectrum. More specifically, what used to be called Asperger's, now classified as autism spectrum disorder, level 1. The words floated in the air like bubbles. I was right. I was autistic. And suddenly, everything made sense. "Does that mean I can't be a pharmacist?" I asked, terrified. She frowned. "Absolutely not. Autism doesn't disqualify you from healthcare. In fact, many autistic traits, attention to detail, systematic thinking, hyperfocuser, huge strengths in pharmacy." She explained reasonable accommodations, my rights under the Equality Act 2010. How universities and employers were legally obligated to adjust for neurodivergent students. For the first time in months, I felt hope. I returned to UCL with my diagnosis and a new sense of clarity. I booked a meeting with Dr. Foster and the Disability Support Office. I was nervous, but determined. I had rights now. I had an explanation. The meeting didn't go how I'd hoped. Dr. Foster received the diagnosis with thinly veiled skepticism. "Well," she said, flipping through the report, "that explains some things. But, Rebecca, a diagnosis doesn't change the demands of the profession. Pharmacists need to communicate effectively with patients." "But I can learn," I insisted. "With the right support, with accommodations, I can improve." Mr. Davis from the Disability Office backed me up, suggesting adjustments like extra time to process during patient interactions, scheduled breaks during long shifts, and quieter environments when possible. Dr. Foster only grew more resistant. "We can't compromise patient care for accommodations," she said. And frankly, I doubt these would even be realistic in the real world of pharmacy. Words I'd later discover were legally questionably and outright discriminatory. June arrived with final exams for the second year. Despite all the setbacks, I crushed them. 95% in advanced pharmacology, 92% in medicinal chemistry. Top 3% of my class. On paper, I was exactly what any pharmacy school would want. But none of that mattered anymore. The story about me had changed. I wasn't the brilliant student with social quirks. I was the autistic student who might not be fit for the profession. The very diagnosis that should have helped me had become a weapon against me. The last day of June should have been a celebration. I'd passed everything with distinction. Halfway through my degree, closer than ever to my dream. Instead, I sat in my room rereading Dr. Foster's email. "Rebecca, given the ongoing concerns about your professional suitability, the department will initiate a formal fitness to practice process at the start of the next academic year." Fitness to practice. The procedure that could expel me not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I wasn't social enough. Because I was autistic. That night, staring out my window at the London skyline, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't go quietly. I wouldn't let them push me out for being who I am. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. September 2022. The third year should have been the turning point. More advanced subjects, hospital placements, the final approach to the profession of my dreams. Instead, it was the month my academic life imploded. The letter arrived on a gray Monday. Official UCL letterhead, my name typed in formal font, subject line that made my stomach drop. Formal fitness to practice hearing. Rebecca Thompson. My hands trembled as I read words that looked like they were in a foreign language, even though they were in perfectly clear English. Following concerns raised about your professional competence and interpersonal skills during clinical placements. The Academic Review Panel has determined that a formal fitness to practice hearing is required to assess your suitability for continuation in the MPharm program. Reading further, I saw a list of evidence to be presented against me. Reports from Mrs. Williams on my interpersonal inadequacy. Patient comments about my cold and impersonal manner. Teacher evaluations questioning my empathetic capacity. And, most devastatingly, a new addition. Concerns about the compatibility between the student's autism diagnosis and the essential requirements of the pharmacy profession. That was it. They were using my autism against me. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th. 3 weeks to prepare my defense. 3 weeks to live with a sword of Damocles hanging over my head. I tried to keep attending classes, but it was impossible to focus. Every glance from classmates felt loaded with pity or morbid curiosity. Some didn't know about the process, but others clearly did. News spreads quickly in a small school. Dr. Mitchell was the only one who offered me genuine support. "Rebecca," she said during a conversation in her office, "this is clear discrimination. Autism is not incompatible with pharmacy practice." But even her support came with a warning. "Unfortunately, you'll have to prove that formally. And the system isn't on your side." I sought out UCL's Student Legal Support Service, hoping for guidance on my rights. The lawyer assigned, Mr. Collins, was a nervous young graduate. "Well," he said, flipping through papers, "fitness to practice is a complex area. Universities have significant authority to determine professional suitability." When I mentioned disability discrimination, he grew even more uneasy. It's difficult to prove discrimination when there's documented evidence of actual performance issues. It was my word against an entire system. The weeks leading up to the hearing were the darkest of my life. I stopped eating properly, lost weight, barely slept. Emma, my roommate, was deeply worried. "Becca, you need professional help," she said one night, finding me crying on the bathroom floor. "This is destroying you." She was right. For the first time in my life, I understood what people meant by depression. It wasn't just sadness. It was a black void that drained all motivation, all hope, all sense of a future. Some days, even getting out of bed felt impossible. The worst part was the betrayal. UCL had been my academic home, my safe place, where my intelligence was valued. Professors I had admired were now in meetings deciding whether I was fit to exist in the profession I loved. It was like discovering your own family had been plotting to get rid of you. I tried to prepare for the hearing as if it were an academic exam. I researched discrimination laws, read similar cases, drafted arguments about why autism could be an advantage in pharmacy. My obsessive attention to detail, my ability to memorize complex drug interactions, my unwavering commitment to safety protocols. But deep down, I knew this wasn't really about competence. It was about fitting in, about being the kind of person they imagined when they thought of a pharmacist. And I wasn't that person. October 15th, Hearing Day. I woke up at 5 a.m. after almost no sleep. I wore my best suit, the one I had bought for high school graduation, back when I was full of hope about the future. I looked in the mirror and tried to find the confident person who had entered UCL a year earlier. She was gone. The hearing room was intimidating. A long table with 5 panel members on one side, a solitary chair on the other. Dr. Foster was there, of course, along with the head of department, Professor Williams, an external pharmacy representative, and 2 unfamiliar faces, all looking at me like an interesting specimen under a microscope. "Miss Thompson," Professor Williams began, his voice echoing in the formal room. "Do you understand why you are here today?" I swallowed hard and answered as firmly as I could. "Yes, sir. To defend my continuation in the MPharm program." What followed were 2 of the most humiliating hours of my life. They read aloud every negative comment, every critical report, every embarrassing moment from my placements, demonstrated lack of empathy, inability to establish rapport with patients, robotic communication, inadequate for a care environment. When it was my turn, I tried to explain autism, masking, how I could improve with proper accommodations. But every word seemed to fall into a void. They asked questions that couldn't be answered satisfactorily. How can we guarantee you'll recognize medical emergencies if you can't read subtle social cues? How will you handle patients in emotional crisis if you struggle with empathy? Dr. Foster was particularly harsh. "Miss Thompson, we appreciate your exceptional academic effort. But pharmacy is not just about knowing medicines. It's about caring for people at their most vulnerable. Based on everything we've observed, I question whether you have the emotional capacity for that responsibility." I felt tears burning in my eyes, but refused to cry in front of them. "I do care about people," I said, my voice trembling. "That's why I want to be a pharmacist. To help, to heal, to make a difference." Professor Williams looked at me with something like pity. "We don't question your intentions, Miss Thompson. We question your ability." The session ended with them saying they would deliberate and give me an answer within 5 business days. 5 days to find out if my future existed. I left the room and, for the first time since childhood, broke down sobbing in the university hallway. I didn't care who saw. I didn't care about dignity or professionalism. My world had just collapsed. Dr. Mitchell found me there. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me on the cold floor until I stopped crying. "They've already decided," I whispered hoarsely. I saw it in their eyes. "I'm a mistake, an error in admission that needs correcting." "You're not a mistake," she said firmly. "You're a brilliant young woman being discriminated against for being different. That's not right." But her words, however well-meaning, felt hollow. If being right mattered, I wouldn't be crying on the floor. The 5 days of waiting were an eternity. I couldn't focus on lectures. I couldn't eat properly. Emma suggested I go home to my family, but I couldn't face my mother's disappointment when she learned her daughter had failed. Thursday, October 20th, the email arrived. Subject: Fitness to practice hearing decision. My hands shook so badly, I could barely click to open it. "Dear Miss Thompson, following careful deliberation by the Academic Review Panel, we regret to inform you that your fitness to practice has been deemed insufficient for continuation in the MPharm program. This decision is based on concerns about your professional competence, particularly in areas of patient communication and empathetic care delivery. Your registration as a student in the MPHARM program is hereby terminated, effective immediately. The world stopped. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. Terminated, expelled. 3 years of work. A lifetime of dreams. Destroyed in a single formal paragraph. And then worse. Additionally, this decision will be reported to the General Pharmaceutical Council, which may impact your future eligibility for professional registration as a pharmacist. Not only had they expelled me, they ensured I could never become a pharmacist anywhere in the UK. It was a professional death sentence. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed in my empty room Emma had left to give me privacy, staring at my pharmacology books, my meticulously organized notebooks, my board with UCL's acceptance letter. They all felt like they belonged to someone else now. A naive girl who believed hard work and intelligence were enough. I called my mother. She cried with me on the phone for 20 minutes. "This can't be right," she kept saying. "There must be something we can do." But what? I was a 22-year-old student against one of the most prestigious universities in the world. David versus Goliath. Except David had no stone, no sling. That was the first night I seriously considered giving up on everything. Not just pharmacy, but life itself. The weight of rejection, public humiliation, and lost identity. It all combined into a pain that felt almost physical in my chest. If the story had ended there, I would have been just another statistic. Another autistic person forced out of a profession by institutional discrimination. Another silenced voice before it had the chance to be heard. But luckily for me, and for every autistic student who would come after, that wasn't where my story ended. It was where it truly began. The next morning, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was anger replacing despair. Maybe it was sheer stubbornness, an autistic trait that, for the first time, would be my ally instead of my obstacle. Or maybe it was the realization that if I didn't fight, not just for myself, but for everyone like me, nothing would ever change. I got out of bed, opened my laptop, and started researching lawyers specializing in educational discrimination. I didn't know how I'd pay for one. I didn't know if I had any chance of winning. I didn't know anything, except that I wasn't going down without a fight. UCL had made a mistake. They underestimated me. They thought I'd disappear quietly. Just another necessary loss to preserve their standards. What they didn't know was that autistic people can be incredibly persistent when we believe in something. And I believed in myself, even when no one else did. October 2022. 3 days after my expulsion, I sat in a waiting room in Grays in the heart of London's legal district, waiting to meet my first lawyer. The atmosphere was intimidating. Walls lined with dark wood, portraits of stern judges looking down, the smell of old books and institutional power. Mr. Jeffrey Harrison was an education lawyer with 40 years of experience, according to his website. Perfectly combed gray hair, an impeccable suit, an aura of competence that made me hope someone would finally understand the injustice of what had happened to me. "Miss Thompson," he said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed my case, "I'll be frank. Fitness to practice is an area where universities hold considerable authority. They can legitimately argue that they have the right to determine who is suitable for regulated professions." My heart sank, even before he continued. "But I'm technically competent," I protested. "My grades are excellent. I've never made a medication error." He nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. "Yes, but they have extensive documentation on interpersonal difficulties. And, frankly, Miss Thompson, the fact that you have autism." He paused awkwardly. Well, it complicates things legally. It was like getting punched in the stomach. Complicates how? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Well, they can argue that your limitations are inherent to your condition, not discrimination. That they're simply recognizing a natural mismatch between your abilities and the requirements of the profession. I left that office feeling smaller than when I had entered. £800 for a consultation to be told my case was impossible. The second lawyer, Miss Patricia Wells, was even more discouraging. "Dear," she said in a condescending tone that made my teeth grit, "sometimes we have to accept that certain professions are simply not suitable for people with your special needs. Have you considered alternative careers? Research, perhaps. Something less people-focused, special needs." As if I were a child with learning difficulties, not an adult with an incomplete pharmacy degree and above-average IQ. "I don't want an alternative career," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I want the career I studied for and am capable of pursuing." She sighed, as if I were a stubborn child. "Miss Thompson, sometimes life forces us to adjust our expectations. It can be a blessing in disguise. You'll avoid years of struggle in a profession where you'll never feel comfortable." 3 lawyers, 3 versions of the same message. Give up. Accept that you don't belong here. Find something more suitable for people like you. It was during these dark days that I received an unexpected call. "Hello, Rebecca. This is James Chen, president of the UCL Pharmacy Student Society." I knew him vaguely. A 4th-year student. Always organized. Always involved in student causes. "I heard about your situation. Some of us are concerned about how it was handled." We arranged to meet for coffee at a small cafe near Bloomsbury. James brought 2 other students. Sarah, 3rd year, and Priya, 2nd year. "Rebecca," James said, nervously stirring his cappuccino, "this isn't right. You're one of the brightest students in our class. We all know that." Sarah leaned forward. "And it's not the first time. Last year, a student with dyslexia went through a similar process. And before that, a girl with social anxiety. There's a pattern here." It was comforting not to be alone, but also frightening. "Do you think I can do anything?" I asked. Priya nodded determinedly. "You need the right lawyer. Someone who understands disability discrimination, not just general education law." She handed me a card. "Tanya Thomas, from Spencer West. My sister is a lawyer, and says she specializes in cases exactly like yours." That night, I researched Tanya Thomas, partner at Spencer West LLP, specialized in education law with a focus on discrimination. She had successful cases against multiple prestigious universities. Most importantly, she seemed to understand the specific complexity of neurodivergent discrimination in higher education. Her website featured testimonials from students she had helped. Tanya not only fought for my right to continue my studies, she fought for my dignity as a person. Without Tanya, I would have given up. Now I am a qualified doctor. She turned the worst moment of my academic life into a victory for all students like me. I called her office on a cold November Monday. I expected another secretary telling me she was too busy, another cold reception. Instead, a gentle but firm voice answered directly. "Tanya Thomas." "Ms. Thomas," I stammered. "My name is Rebecca Thompson. Was a pharmacy student at UCL. I was expelled for being autistic and need help." Silence for a moment, then, "Rebecca, you can come to my office tomorrow at 2. And stop saying you were expelled for being autistic. You were discriminated against illegally. There's an important difference. That simple correction. Discriminated against, not expelled for being autistic." changed something fundamental in my head. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. The Spencer West office was different from the other legal places I had visited. Modern but welcoming. Abundant, natural light, living plants. A sense that people here genuinely cared about justice, not just legal precedent. Tanya Thomas was a woman in her 40s. Brown hair tied in a practical bun. Intelligent eyes that seemed to see through facades to the truth. She greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to her office, where she offered tea and made me sit in a comfortable armchair instead of across an intimidating desk. "So," she said, opening a new notebook, "tell me your story. From the beginning. And Rebecca. May I call you Rebecca? I want you to know from the start. What happened to you was wrong. My job is to prove that legally." For 2 hours, I told everything. Every frustrating interaction, every comment on my inadequacy, every moment of humiliation during the hearing. Tanya constantly took notes, asking specific questions, requesting details other lawyers had dismissed as irrelevant. When they mentioned your autism during the hearing, she asked, "Did they use it specifically as evidence against your professional suitability?" I nodded. Dr. Foster said he questioned whether autism was compatible with the essential requirements of pharmacy. Tanya's eyes shone with something I recognized as controlled outrage. That's direct discrimination under the Equality Act, 2010. There's no legal ambiguity here. She closed her notebook and looked at me directly. "Rebecca, do you want to fight this? Because it won't be easy. UCL is powerful, with enormous resources, and will fight hard to protect their reputation." "I want to fight," I said without hesitation. "Not just for me, but so this doesn't happen to other students." She smiled. The first genuine smile I had seen from a lawyer. "Perfect. Because I want to fight too. And we will win. But first," she explained, "there were procedural hurdles. You need to exhaust the university's internal processes before we can go to court. That means appealing to the Office of the Independent Adjudicator. The OIA. I had heard of it, but didn't fully understand the process. It's essentially an ombudsman for higher education," Tanya explained. "They can overturn university decisions if they find discrimination or procedural errors. And Rebecca, they have a much better track record than regular courts for disability discrimination cases in higher education." She explained the evidence we'd need to gather, witnesses we should contact, legal arguments to construct. "We'll show that you weren't just discriminated against, but that UCL fundamentally failed in meeting their legal obligations under equality law." When I left that office 3 hours later, I felt like a different person. No longer a tearful victim begging for mercy, but someone with legal rights and a brilliant lawyer ready to fight for them. Tanya had given me more than legal hope. She had restored my dignity. That night, I called my mother. "Mom," I said, "I found a lawyer, a good one, and she believes we can win." My mother cried with relief. "Becca, love. Since you were little, I knew you were special. Different, perhaps, but special. It's time the world sees that too." But Tanya was clear about the challenges ahead. "Rebecca," she said as I was leaving, "prepare for a long fight. UCL won't give in easily. They will scrutinize every aspect of your case, every detail of your academic life. They'll try to discredit you in every way possible." She paused, studying me carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for this? Because once we start, there's no turning back. It will be public, stressful, and there will be moments you'll want to quit." I thought of the humiliation of the hearing, the nights crying on the bathroom floor, the brutal email informing my expulsion. I thought of all the other autistic students who would come after me, who would face the same prejudices if nothing changed. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time since the expulsion, I truly believed it. They messed with the wrong person. Tanya smiled again, an expression part admiration, part fierce determination. "Yes," she said, "they did. And now they'll find out what happens when you discriminate against someone who refuses to stay quiet." November 2022. In the weeks following my first meeting with Tanya, my life gained a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before the expulsion. For the first time in months, I woke up energized, with something to fight for. It was no longer just about me. It was about principles, about justice, about changing a system that had failed me and would fail others. Tanya explained that building a strong case would be like assembling a complex puzzle. Every piece of evidence, every email, every discriminatory comment would be crucial. "Rebecca," she said during our second meeting, "you have an advantage many clients don't. You are meticulous by nature. That's going to be essential." She was right. My autistic brain, once treated as a disadvantage by UCL, would now become my greatest weapon. I had saved everything. Every email from professors, every written assessment, every comment about my interpersonal deficiencies. I organized them chronologically, categorized by type of discrimination, creating a file that systematically documented 2 years of gradually escalating prejudice. "Look at this," Tanya said, reviewing my files one December afternoon. They documented their own discrimination. It's almost as if they created a manual on how not to treat autistic students. She pointed to a particular email from Dr. Foster. "Given Miss Thompson's autism diagnosis, we must question whether she possesses the emotional intelligence necessary for patient care." "This is legal gold," Tanya continued. "They're literally saying they question your abilities solely based on your autism diagnosis. That's direct discrimination in its rawest form." Seeing my pain transformed into legal evidence was strangely cathartic. Every humiliation I had suffered now served a greater purpose. But building the case also meant reliving every painful moment in excruciating detail. Tanya made me write statements about every discriminatory interaction, every comment that had hurt me, every moment I felt diminished for being autistic. It was like emotional surgery without anesthesia. "Tell me about the first time you felt that being autistic was seen as a problem by the university," Tanya said during one of our longest sessions. I closed my eyes, returning to that terrible afternoon when Dr. Foster first questioned my emotional suitability. "It was after the patient's simulation in March," I said, words coming slowly as I processed painful memories. "She said I was robotic, that I didn't show empathy. But I was trying to be professional, follow protocols. I didn't understand they wanted something different." Tanya took notes on every detail, occasionally asking questions that helped me recall specific aspects that would be legally important. One of the most revealing aspects of the process was discovering how many other students had gone through similar experiences. Tanya had a network of contacts across universities, and similar stories surfaced regularly. "There's a national pattern," she explained. "Neurodivergent students being pushed out of healthcare professions under the guise of professional suitability. It's systemic discrimination disguised as academic standards." This made me realize that my individual fight was part of something much larger. I wasn't just fighting to return to UCL. I was challenging decades of institutionalized prejudice against people like me. In December, Tanya arranged a meeting with Dr. Emma Hughes, the psychologist who had diagnosed me. "Rebecca," Dr. Hughes said, "your case made me professionally furious. I've been diagnosing autism for 15 years, and I've seen many brilliant clients dismissed by institutions that don't understand neuro. She agreed to be our expert witness. I can clearly demonstrate that nothing in your autism diagnosis is incompatible with competent pharmacy practice. In fact, many autistic traits are advantageous in pharmacy. Obsessive attention to detail, exceptional memory for complex information, unwavering dedication to safety protocols. Dr. Hughes helped me understand something crucial. The problem had never been my actual abilities, but the stereotyped perceptions of autism. UCL reacted to the label autistic, not your actual performance, she explained. That is the definition of disability discrimination. January 2023 brought an unexpected development. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the professor who had first suggested I might be autistic, contacted me secretly. "Rebecca," she said during a discreet meeting at a cafe far from the university, "what happened to you was wrong, and I feel partially responsible. If I hadn't suggested you seek a diagnosis—" "Dr. Mitchell," I interrupted, "the diagnosis saved me. It gave me answers I needed." She shook her head sadly. "But they used it against you in a way that violates all principles of proper educational support. I want to help with your case." Having a professor from UCL willing to testify was a game changer. Dr. Mitchell could speak to my exceptional academic abilities, about how I was one of the most dedicated students she had ever met, and about how the university failed to provide appropriate accommodations before judging me unfit. But perhaps the most transformative moment came when Tanya introduced me to other students who had faced similar discrimination. "I want you to meet Marcus," she said, one January afternoon. "He's a medical student with ADHD who went through a similar fitness to practice process at King's College." Marcus was 25, in his fourth year of medical school, and had nearly been expelled for inappropriate behavior that boiled down to misunderstood ADHD symptoms. "Rebecca," he told me, "what you're doing is important, not just for you, but for all of us. Every legal victory makes it harder for universities to discriminate against the next neurodivergent student." Finding this community of people who understood my experience was profoundly healing. For the first time, I didn't feel alone or abnormal. We were a group of brilliant people, judged for our differences rather than our abilities. In February, we began formally drafting our complaint to the Office of the Independent Adjudicator. The document had 40 pages of meticulously organized evidence, detailed legal arguments, and expert testimonies. Reading the final version was surreal. My academic life transformed into a formal legal case, every injustice catalogued and contextualized within discrimination law. "This is one of the strongest educational discrimination cases I've ever prepared," Tanya told me as we finalized the documents. "You have clear documentary evidence, credible expert witnesses, and an obvious pattern of disability discrimination. UCL will have significant difficulty defending their actions." But she also prepared me for the resistance we would face. "Rebecca, they will do everything possible to discredit you. They'll argue that you really were unfit, that your difficulties were real and problematic. They'll try to paint you as a troubled student using autism as an excuse for incompetence." "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time, I truly was. Months of work with Tanya had transformed me from a tearful victim into an informed fighter. I knew my rights, understood the law, and had solid evidence on my side. More importantly, I had found my voice. For years, I had tried to fit in, tried to be what others expected, tried to mask who I truly was. Now, for the first time, I was fighting to be accepted exactly as I am. The process also helped me reconsider my own narrative about professional suitability. Rebecca, Tanya said in one of our final preparatory meetings, "I want you to stop thinking of yourself as someone who has to prove they are fit despite being autistic. You are fit, period. Your autistic traits aren't obstacles to overcome. They are part of what makes you an exceptional pharmacist." This shift in perspective was revolutionary. Instead of apologizing for my neurodivergence, I began seeing it as a strength. My obsessive attention to detail could prevent fatal medication errors. My unwavering dedication to protocols could save lives. My ability to process complex information quickly could benefit patients who required carefully considered medication interactions. In March 2023, exactly 1 year after receiving the first email about my fitness to practice process, we formally submitted our complaint to the OIA. 40 pages of evidence, 6 months of meticulous work, and years of pain transformed into a powerful legal weapon. "Now we wait," Tanya said after we confirmed submission. "The OIA has up to 6 months to review and decide. But Rebecca, regardless of the outcome, you've already won something important. You've found your voice, refused to be silenced, and created a legal record others can use." That night, alone in my apartment, I looked out over the lights of London and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year: real hope. Not just hope that I could return to pharmacy, but hope that I could be part of real change, that my fight could make things better for other students like me. Dr. Foster and UCL had thought they were too powerful to challenge. They had underestimated a determined young autistic woman with a brilliant lawyer and a solid case. In a few months, they would discover exactly how wrong they were. April 2023. 3 weeks after we submitted our complaint to the Office of the Independent Adjudicator, the first response from UCL arrived. 80 pages of vehement denials, detailed counterarguments, and a clear legal strategy to completely discredit my version of events and paint me as a genuinely unfit student, using autism as an excuse for real incompetence. Tanya spread the documents across the conference table in her office, her expression hardening as she read. "They're not backing down," she said, flipping one of the pages toward me. "In fact, they're doubling down. Look at this." I read the paragraph she had highlighted. "Miss Thompson has repeatedly demonstrated a fundamental inability to engage in appropriate interpersonal interactions in the context of healthcare. Her social communication deficits, exacerbated by her autistic condition, represent genuine risks to patient safety. The university maintains that their actions were necessary and appropriate to protect the public." Every word felt like a blade. They weren't just defending their actions, they were attacking my character, my competence, my very existence as an autistic person in the profession. "They're saying I'm dangerous," I murmured, rereading the document. "They're talking nonsense," Tanya replied firmly, "but well-articulated nonsense from expensive lawyers. Rebecca, we need to prepare for a battle far more intense than we expected. UCL is not going to back down." The following weeks were an intensive course in how the legal system can be used both for justice and intimidation. UCL had hired one of London's most prestigious law firms, Clifford Chance, known for their aggressive approach in high-profile cases. They weren't just defending an academic decision. They were protecting the reputation of one of the most respected universities in the world. Their strategy quickly became clear. First, they questioned every aspect of my academic performance, arguing that my interpersonal difficulties had been evident from day one and only worsened over time. Second, they brought in a series of experts to testify that autism was, in fact, incompatible with safe pharmacy practice. They've secured Dr. Richard Pemberton, Tanya told me on a gloomy May afternoon, showing me a list of UCL witnesses. He's a psychiatrist with, let's say, outdated views on autism and professional capability. He will argue that autistic people lack the emotional intuition necessary to detect subtle medical emergencies. It was demoralizing to see how easy it was to find experts willing to argue against my basic humanity. Dr. Pemberton had published articles questioning whether autistic people should be allowed in professions involving complex interpersonal judgment. It was exactly the kind of academic pseudoscience that lent a veneer of credibility to prejudice. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of UCL's strategy was how they recontextualized every interaction I had had during my studies. Moments I remembered as minor misunderstandings were reframed as evidence of fundamental incompetence. A conversation where I had asked detailed questions about medication protocols was described as obsessive inflexibility, incompatible with individualized patient care. It's surreal, I told Tanya during one of our weekly meetings. They're taking everything that makes me a good pharmacist and turning it into evidence of why I shouldn't be a pharmacist. She nodded gravely. It's a common tactic in discrimination cases. Take the person's disability traits and redefine them as professional inadequacies. The OIAS investigation process was more intense than I had imagined. 3 independent investigators were assigned to the case, each specializing in different areas: discrimination law, educational policy, and pharmacy professional standards. They interviewed dozens of people: UCL professors, fellow students, pharmacists who had supervised me, and experts from both sides. In June, it was my turn to be formally interviewed. 3 hours in a sterile conference room. 3 investigators asking questions, ranging from technical aspects of my pharmaceutical knowledge to deeply personal questions about how my autism affected social interactions. Miss Thompson, one investigator asked, "Can you describe a specific moment during your placements where your autistic traits may have created a suboptimal situation for a patient?" It was a trap. Question anything I said could be used to suggest I was genuinely unfit. I took a deep breath and thought of Tanya's guidance. Be honest, but provide context. There were moments where my communication was more direct than some patients expected, I said carefully. But there was never a moment when a patient did not receive appropriate care or correct information because of my personal traits. If anything, my obsessive attention to detail prevented potential medication errors. The interviews continued for days. Every question seemed designed to make me doubt my own suitability. How would you react if a patient was clearly distressed, but did not verbalize it directly? What nonverbal cues would you look for to assess if a patient understood medication instructions? How would you differentiate between a polite patient and one being resistant? They were valid questions, but the underlying implication was clear. Autistic people cannot read others properly, therefore cannot care for others properly. It was the same prejudice I had faced at UCL, just formulated more subtly. July brought an unexpected twist. Dr. Foster, apparently frustrated with the investigation's length, gave an interview to a professional pharmacy publication where she made public comments about the growing challenges of students with special needs in higher education. Though she did not name me directly, the references were obvious. Some neurological conditions, she said in the interview, simply are not compatible with the interpersonal demands of modern pharmacy. We have a professional obligation to protect the public, even if that means making difficult decisions about student suitability. Tanya was furious. She just made a huge mistake, she told me, waving a copy of the publication. Public comments during an active investigation, clearly aimed at your case, demonstrating bias. This is gold for us. But the comment also made the case more public than I had anticipated. Other pharmacy students began recognizing me, some discreetly offering support, others avoiding me, as if discrimination were contagious. I felt like I was living in a fishbowl. Every move observed and judged. The hardest part was how the legal battle began to consume my life. I woke thinking about legal arguments. I went to bed reviewing evidence. Every email from Tanya's office made my heart race. I was living in a state of constant hypervigilance that was mentally exhausting. Emma, my former roommate, visited in August and was clearly shocked by my appearance. "Becca, you look worn out," she said gently. "When was the last time you did something not related to the case?" I couldn't remember. August also brought UCL's response to our additional evidence. They had doubled down even further, bringing statements from other students claiming I had created uncomfortable environments during group projects. These were vague, unverifiable accusations, but they built a narrative of someone genuinely difficult to work with. "This is a systematic campaign of discrediting," Tanya explained. "They're trying to create a pattern of problematic behavior that would justify their actions." Reading these new documents was devastating. People I had considered colleagues, if not friends, had provided statements painting me as a problematic, antisocial student. September marked 6 months since we submitted our initial complaint. The OIA had indicated that a decision would be made soon, but soon, in the legal system, seemed to have no defined meaning. Each passing day was another day I wasn't studying pharmacy, another day away from the career I loved. It was during this waiting period that I had my darkest moment since the original expulsion. One particularly difficult night in September, after reading yet another round of UCL's brutal counterarguments, I called Tanya in tears. "I can't do this anymore," I sobbed. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I really am unfit. Maybe I should just give up and find something easier." There was a moment of silence on the line before Tanya's firm voice cut through my self-pity. "Rebecca Thompson," she said, "you are one of the smartest and most determined people I've ever met. UCL is spending hundreds of thousands of pounds fighting you, because they know they have a weak case. They wouldn't fight this hard if you were truly unfit, they'd just let you go." Her words made me stop crying. It was a perspective I hadn't considered. "If you give up now," she continued, "you don't just lose your own career, you validate every discriminatory argument they made. You make it easier for them to do this to the next autistic student." That night, I made a conscious decision to stop obsessively reading legal documents and start taking better care of myself. I returned to regular exercise, cooking proper meals, reading books unrelated to law. If I was going to fight this battle to the end, I needed to be mentally healthy for it. October brought signs that a decision was near. The OIA requested final clarifications from both sides, a typical signal that they were finalizing their review. Tanya prepared me for both possible outcomes. "If we win," she said, "UCL may still resist, try to appeal, or create obstacles to your return. If we lose, we could consider taking the case to the regular courts, although that's more costly and time-consuming. Either way, it wouldn't be the end of the fight." On November 15, 2023, exactly 8 months after we submitted our complaint, Tanya called me with an urgency in her voice I hadn't heard before. "Rebecca," she said, "the OIA decision has arrived. Can you come to the office now?" My hand shook so much I almost dropped the phone. "Just tell me," I pleaded, "did we win or lose?" There was a pause that felt like an eternity. "Come to the office," she repeated. "We have a lot to discuss." November 15, 2023. At 2:32 p.m., sitting in Tanya Thomas's familiar conference room, I read the words that changed my life. The OIA finds that the university's fitness to practice decision was fundamentally flawed and constitutes clear discrimination under the Equality Act, 2010. My hands trembled, holding the decision document. 10 pages of detailed legal analysis, but the conclusion was crystal clear. I had won. Completely. "Rebecca," Tanya said, watching my shocked expression, "you didn't just win, you achieved one of the most comprehensive victories I've ever seen in an educational discrimination case." She pointed to specific paragraphs she had highlighted. "They didn't just overturn your expulsion. They declared that UCL violated multiple sections of the Equality Act and fundamentally failed in their duties toward students with disabilities." I read each word in growing disbelief. The OIA had systematically dismantled every argument from UCL, exposing not only blatant discrimination but an institutional pattern of bias against neurodivergent students. The university failed to provide reasonable accommodations. I read aloud, based judgments on stereotypes about autism rather than actual evidence of performance, and conducted a fitness to practice process that was tainted from the outset by discriminatory bias. But the true vindication lay in the remedial orders. UCL not only had to reinstate me immediately, they had to implement systemic changes to prevent future discrimination. Mandatory neurodiversity training for all faculty. Full review of fitness to practice policies. University-funded occupational assessment for me. And a substantial sum of compensation for the harm caused. "How much?" I asked, looking at the financial section. Tanya smiled, the first time I had seen her genuinely smile in months. £25,000 in damages, plus all legal fees, plus funding for your educational support for the remainder of the course. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life, but more importantly, was official recognition that I had been wronged. That afternoon, I called my mother. "Mom," I said, barely able to form the words, "I won, completely." She cried into the phone for 5 straight minutes. "Becca, love. Ever since you were little, I knew you were special. Now the whole world knows too." UCL's response to the decision was interesting. No public apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Instead, a cold corporate statement. The university respects the OIA's decision and will implement all required changes to ensure that our student support policy continues to improve. Dr. Foster was removed from her fitness to practice supervisory role, one of the specific changes mandated by the OIA. Professor Williams remained as head of department, but under intensified supervision from the new equality policies. The most rewarding part was the reaction from my former fellow students. James Chen called me the same day the decision was announced. "Rebecca, you did it. The whole school is talking about this. You didn't just come back, you changed the rules for all of us." Sarah and Priya organized a small celebration at the local pharmacy student pub. It felt strange to be back in that environment after more than a year away, but also profoundly vindicating. Students who barely knew me approached to congratulate me. Some sharing their own discrimination stories, now feeling empowered to challenge them. "You've opened a door," a second-year student with dyslexia told me. "Now we all know we can fight if we're treated unfairly." It was exactly what I had hoped to achieve. December brought my official reintegration into UCL. After 14 months away, stepping back on campus was surreal. The same Victorian buildings, the same hallways steeped in history, but I was a completely different person. No longer the anxious student trying to fit in, but a young woman who had fought the system and won. My first class back was advanced pharmacotherapy with Dr. Mitchell. She greeted me at the door with a warm hug, completely inappropriate in formal academic context, but perfect for the circumstances. "Welcome back, Rebecca. We missed you." What impressed me most was the shift in the department's overall environment. The new student support coordinator, Dr. James Morrison, had implemented the OIA-mandated changes with impressive efficiency. Every student now had a mandatory initial meeting about accommodations and support. Faculty had undergone intensive neurodiversity training. The old adversarial system had been replaced by a collaborative approach. "Rebecca," Dr. Morrison told me during our initial meeting, "we want to ensure you have everything you need to succeed. Not just now, but for the rest of your course." He had prepared a personalized support plan based on the OIA-mandated occupational assessment, regular breaks during long days, low stimulation, study environments, and most importantly, formal recognition that my neurodivergence was a strength, not a weakness. January 2024 marked my return to clinical placements. This was the real test. Could I function effectively in a pharmacy after everything that had happened? I was assigned to the Royal London Hospital, under supervision of Chief Pharmacist Anne Williams, no relation to Professor Williams from university. Mrs. Williams was a woman in her 50s, who had clearly been briefed on my situation. Our first conversation was revealing. "Rebecca," she said, "I read about your case. What happened to you was wrong, and I am determined to ensure your experience here is positive and educational." She had organized the placement to maximize my strengths, while providing support in areas where I needed development. Tasks requiring detailed analysis of drug interactions where I excelled. Moments requiring sensitive, empathetic communication where I had intensive mentorship. "We'll work on your communication skills," she told me, "not because you're inadequate, but because everyone can improve. And we'll use your exceptional analytical strengths to benefit our most complex patients." The difference in approach was night and day. Instead of being constantly criticized for not being naturally empathetic, I was taught specific techniques to demonstrate care in ways compatible with my neurodivergence. Instead of being penalized for my direct communication, I was encouraged to use it with patients who would benefit from clear and precise information. A particularly memorable moment came in February. An elderly patient with multiple chronic conditions was confused about his complex medication regimen: 8 different drugs, some taken multiple times a day, some as needed. Other pharmacists had tried simplified language and metaphors, but he remained confused. I approached the problem differently. I created a detailed visual chart, color-coded by time and drug function. I explained exactly how each drug worked in his body and why timing mattered. I used precise technical language he could research later if he wanted more information. It worked perfectly. "Finally," he said, "someone treats me like a smart adult, not a confused child. Now, I understand completely." Mrs. Williams, who had observed the interaction, congratulated me afterward. "That was exceptional, Rebecca. You found a way to use your direct communication as a genuine strength." March brought news that my case was having impact beyond UCL. Tanya informed me that other universities were proactively reviewing their fitness to practice policies, fearing similar investigations. 2 other neurodivergent students had contacted her, seeking help with their own discriminatory situations. "You've started real change," Tanya said during one of our regular follow-up meetings. The legal precedent we established is being cited in cases across the country. It was surreal to think that my personal fight had become part of British educational jurisprudence. April marked 1 year since I had begun my legal battle. To celebrate, Dr. Mitchell organized a small departmental symposium on neurodiversity in pharmacy. I was invited to speak about my experience, the first time I would share my story publicly. When I arrived at UCL 3 years ago, I told an audience of students, faculty, and pharmacy professionals, I thought I had to fit into a predefined mold of what a pharmacist should be. Now I understand that the profession is better when it includes people with different perspectives, different strengths, different ways of thinking. The response was overwhelming. Students approached afterward to share their own neurodivergence experiences. Faculty requested resources to better support diverse students. Professionals spoke about autistic colleagues who were exceptional pharmacists. May brought my third-year final exams, the same exams I should have taken a year earlier if I hadn't been expelled. Studying for them was a strange experience, mixing familiar material with the new perspective I had gained about myself and the profession. Results arrived in June. 96% overall average, top of the class. More important than the grades, however, were the comments from professors. Exceptional technical knowledge, combined with growing sophistication in interpersonal communication. One of the most dedicated and conscientious students we have ever taught. Will be a valuable addition to the pharmacy profession. In July, almost 2 years after the email that had destroyed my world, I received an official letter from UCL. Not an expulsion this time, but confirmation that I had been promoted to the 4th and final year of the M.Pharm course. With academic distinction and special recommendation from the department. That night, alone in my room, I looked out at the same London lights I had gazed at during the darkest moments of my struggle. But now, instead of despair, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. Gratitude for the fight that had forced me to grow stronger. Gratitude for the discrimination that had taught me about justice. Gratitude for the system that had tried to break me, but instead had forged me into something unbreakable. I had not only survived, DHI had thrived. And in the process, I had helped make the world a slightly fairer place for the next autistic person who dreamed of becoming a pharmacist. September 2024. I'm writing these words in my final year of pharmacy at UCL, with just 6 months left until graduation. Through the library window, I watch new students arriving for their first day, nervous, hopeful, carrying dreams I hope they never have to defend the way I did. 3 years have passed since that terrible morning when I received the email of my expulsion. 2 years since I began the legal fight that changed not only my life, but the entire system. And now, looking back, I realize the most important person I learned to know during this journey was myself. For 21 years, I lived trying to be someone I was not. Masking my neurodivergence, apologizing for processing the world differently. Accepting the narrative that I was broken and needed to be fixed. It took being expelled from a university to finally understand that I never needed fixing. The system needed to change. Today, I am a confident pharmacist in training who sees my autism not as an obstacle, but as a professional superpower. My obsessive attention to detail has already prevented 3 potential serious medication errors during my placements. My exceptional memory for drug interactions makes me a sought-after consultant among colleagues. My direct communication, when used appropriately, reassures patients who need clear information about their conditions. But perhaps the most important lesson has been about the power of refusing to accept injustice. My whole life, I was taught to be polite, to not cause trouble, to accept the place others decided for me. When I finally said no, when I decided I deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, everything changed. UCL today is a different university from the one that expelled me. The new support system for neurodivergent students has become a national model. Dr. Morrison, the coordinator who replaced the old regime, recently told me they now have the highest number of successful autistic students in the school's history. "You didn't just open the door," he said. "You threw it wide open." 3 other neurodivergent students reached out to me this year, facing similar discrimination at other universities. Each cited my case as inspiration to fight. Tanya Thomas, whom I now consider not just a lawyer but a mentor and friend, told me my legal precedent is being cited in courts across the UK. "Rebecca," she said in our last meeting, "you didn't just change your own life. You changed the system. Every autistic student who graduates in medicine, nursing, or pharmacy from now on owes part of their success to your courage to fight." But the deepest change happened within me. I learned that being different does not mean being less. I learned that neurodivergence is valuable cognitive diversity, not a deficiency to overcome. I learned that the world needs people who think differently, who see patterns others miss, who obsessively care about details that can save lives. Last month, I had an experience that crystallized everything I had learned. An elderly patient came to the hospital pharmacy, where I am placed, confused about a complex medication regimen recently altered by her doctor. She was clearly anxious, nearly in tears, saying she didn't want to bother anyone with questions. Instead of using the empathetic communication techniques I had learned, though they also have their place, I chose to use my natural approach: direct, detailed, systematic. I sat with her for 20 minutes, drew diagrams, explained exactly how each medication change worked, and answered every technical question she had. When we finished, she held my hands with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for treating me like an intelligent person, for not for caring enough to explain properly." It was exactly the type of interaction Dr. Foster would have criticized as cold or inadequately empathetic. But it had been deeply human and genuinely helpful. This is the truth it took 3 years to learn. Authenticity is more valuable than performativity. Being genuinely yourself, using your natural strengths to help others, is infinitely better than trying to imitate what others expect from you. Today, when I see younger autistic students struggling with the same doubts I had, I always say the same thing. You don't need to fit into the mold someone created for your profession. You can break that mold and create a new one. Dr. Mitchell, who continues to be a mentor and ally, asked me to speak at the National Conference on Pharmacy Education next month. I will share my story with hundreds of educators, advocating not just for inclusion, but for the celebration of neurodivergence as a professional strength. My presentation is called The Neurodivergent Future of Pharmacy, and the central thesis is simple. Health professions need people who think differently. We need pharmacists who see patterns in data others miss, who remember obscure interactions that could be crucial, who obsessively care about accuracy when lives are at stake. When I graduate in March 2025, I will officially be a registered pharmacist, the profession that was almost denied to me for being autistic. But more importantly, I will be a living symbol that the system can change. Injustice can be confronted and defeated, and one determined person can make a real difference. I already have job offers from 3 different hospital pharmacies, including the Royal London Hospital, where I trained under Mrs. Williams. Each of them not only accepts my neurodivergence, but sees it as a competitive advantage. Times have truly changed. I plan to specialize in oncology, pharmacology, a field that demands exactly the skills where I excel. Meticulous analysis of complex drug interactions, obsessive attention to safety protocols, clear and direct communication with patients facing frightening situations who need precise information, not comforting platitudes. My mother visited last week and was moved seeing my progress. "Becca," she said, "you've become exactly who I always knew you could be. It just took the world a while to see it." I gently corrected her. "No, Mom. I became who I always was. I just stopped apologizing for it." If you are hearing this story and recognize yourself in it, if you are neurodivergent, if you have been underestimated, if someone told you that you are not fit for your dreams, I want you to know you are not alone. Your difference is not a flaw. Your unique traits are not obstacles to overcome, but powerful tools to contribute to the world in ways no one else can. The system will try to mold you, diminish you, convince you that you must conform to belong. That is a lie. The world needs exactly who you are, with all your quirks, all your intensities, all your different ways of seeing and processing reality. When you face discrimination and, unfortunately, you may remember that you have rights. Remember that there are laws to protect you. Remember that there are lawyers like Tanya Thomas, mentors like Dr. Mitchell, and entire communities of people who understand your struggle and are ready to support you. But most importantly, remember that you have a voice. Use it. Raise it. Refuse to be silenced. The world only changes when courageous people say, "This isn't right," and refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. My journey from being expelled for being autistic to nearly graduating pharmacist and national advocate has not been easy. There were nights crying on the bathroom floor, moments I wanted to give up, battles that seemed impossible to win. But every tear, every fight, every small victory brought me here stronger, wiser, more determined to use my voice for others who still need to find theirs. In 6 months, when I walk across the stage to receive my degree, I will not only be celebrating my personal success, I will be celebrating every neurodivergent student who comes after me. Every autistic person dreaming of a career in health. Every young person refusing to accept that different means less. Pharmacy needs us. Medicine needs us. The world needs us. And now, finally, we are beginning to claim our rightful place in these spaces, not despite our neurodivergence, but because of it. If this journey inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more real stories of perseverance that need to be told. Share with someone who needs to hear that it is possible to succeed. And tell me in the comments, which part of Becca's journey resonated with you most? Your participation keeps the flame of these important stories alive. Together, we can ensure that no one is diminished for being exactly who they were born to be.
Note: this story is based on the documented real case of JC Name, protected by legal confidentiality. An autistic student who faced a fitness to practice process at a prestigious British university in 2022. The case was conducted by lawyer Tanya Thomas, partner at Spencer West LLP, specialized in educational law and disability discrimination. The victory was achieved through the Office of the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education (OIA) in 2023. JC's real case continues to be cited in similar processes throughout the United Kingdom, representing a historic victory for neurodivergent student rights in higher education. This adaptation was created with educational objectives and to raise awareness about neurodivergence, discrimination. Any resemblance to other people or events is coincidental. For information about the original case, Spencer West, LLP Education Law Division.